You got to take that shit global.
Yeah, you got to leave Slough, bro. Like, what the hell?
This is a Main Hustle Media podcast.
Virtual Reality Studios. A new realm of creativity.
Welcome to Matcha and Masala, blended besties spill the tea, just a couple of mixed mates musing over matcha, masala, and murder. So I am Rhia Kaur, and this is
Sharmane Fury.
And together we are Matcha and Masala.
I'm so glad we're finally doing this. We decided, well, I guess let's just tell the story about what we're doing and what's happened.
So who are you?
I am your Sir Auntie, Sharmane Fury, aka the Blasian Blurred. I am the host or co-host of Militantly Mixed, Blurred Comics, a show that's on hiatus, Queer and Far, and now co-host of Matcha and Masala. I am a Black Japanese British American currently living in Mexico, and I'm just wanting a podcast all the time. And you were a guest on my show, and I became obsessed with you and decided to do a podcast with you. So,
yay! So, yeah, I am Rhia Kaur, and I became obsessed with making you my new best friend when I was a guest on your podcast.
I'm so glad it was mutual because it could have been really awkward.
Yeah. I'm not deranged at all. It's fine. So I am a mixed South Asian woman, born in Wales, grew up in England, currently living in London. I have a cross-cultural marriage and a mixed son, and you can find me as Mixed Race Mama, where I talk all things mixed on Instagram and on my website, Mixed Race Mama, and also on my podcast, which are mini voice notes about lived experience of me growing up as a mixed South Asian woman.
I'm not gonna lie, I'm a little jealous that you have that idea and that you released that, because I'm like, man, these long ass podcasts.
Right? There was method to this, because I knew I did want to start doing something, and I definitely wanted to put out a podcast, but I knew that I was a bit nervous, and I do definitely know that I work better with someone else. And I thought, if it's just me, I'm going to go off on too many tangents and just ramble, and then that's a heavy edit, and who's got the time? Yeah. So then I just thought, actually, this is kind of what I think would be fun for people, because it's just something a bit different. And there are so many excellent mixed race podcasts obviously out there already, and I just thought this is something different. It's just a different angle for people, and hopefully then they can just dip in and out. And I'm not too precious about the numbers and the audience on that either. I kind of like that it's quite small and mostly just from the community from my Instagram, and that suits me. It just sort of serves its purpose and keeps me in that way. And now we're here.
You might as well use the content. Like you are talking about things on your Instagram, you have these series, and then it kind of translates sometimes into an episode or whatever. And there's been posts that you've had, or episodes that you had, that I'm like, oh, that's a different like view than I've seen before or done or thought of. And then it sends me on a whole tangent, just like your recent video with Basha Kids.
Oh, yeah.
Anita. And I know you were specifically talking about Indian languages, but I could apply so much of what y'all talked about in my own like language journey, trying to learn Spanish while living in Mexico. So like, I think it's just great. I love the form that you take, and like you, I thrive better when I'm collaborative. And while Militantly Mixed does allow me to speak to other mixed people, they're not a part of the project. They're just showing up for the discussion. And so I'm still the one sitting in my little room, doing the edit and things, and it can get daunting at times. And then with my other shows, I do have partners for the host bit. but not for the work bit.
and so, there is work. Yeah.
And there is work in this thing, right? And so I get a bit tired with that too. But this is the first time, and no shade to my other co-hosts because I love them. We had the agreement we had. But in our case, like the fact that we're both existing podcasters, we both have strengths, different strengths in the same genre, I guess. I just, I think our flow just happened so well. And when we met, which I will reference in the show notes, the episode of Militantly Mixed that Rhia was on, that was the first time we had spoken.
Yes. Yeah.
And you would think we knew each other forever. Like I immediately liked you so much. And so I was so caught up in our chat that for the first time in 5 years, I failed to ask the question I ask every single guest of my show, which is, and what do you love most about being mixed? It's how I end the show. It's like a happy little thing to end the show, because sometimes we talk about heavy stuff related to mixed identity. And when I realized it, I was like, oh no. And then I said, oh, I have an excuse to not be weird and, reach out and be like, can we talk again? So we did a live like a week later.
But I think maybe I had emailed you already to be like, that was great. I really think it would be cool to find another way to work together. Like,
I think we were simultaneously doing
maybe it was a crossover.
All in the same day. And then it was like, oh, okay, good. I wasn't weird. Oh, okay, good. I wasn't weird. And we decided that because you had an idea about us talking specifically about our differences as mixed people across the pond, essentially. And with me being, I do describe myself as a British American, and that's because half of my family is British. But I was born and raised in America, but I was raised around my British grandmother, and therefore I have a lot of the idioms, a lot of the phrases, a lot of the mentality. And
I didn't have to explain my weird turns of phrase.
It was so good too, and that happens to me too. Like, yes, I am an American and I have American friends, and then I say something and they're just like, what was that you just said? What did you call that? Or something like that. It could get a little risky sometimes because some of the things that Brits say rhyme or sound like derogatory things in the US. And so then I had to wait. Sorry, hold on. Let's go back. This is what this means. And to finally have a friend that I don't really have to pause and do.
We don't have to translate with her.
Yeah. And to be fair, like that first live that we did, we brought up a lot of the things that we both experienced. And I mean, you're pretty traveled too, so you've seen some of the stuff that I was describing being an American. But it was just nice. I just knew instantly we should be friends, and we started emailing back and forth after that, which turned into what I now refer to as the joke was, you and I have so much in common. We're mixed people. We're both of some kind of British heritage. We both drink a lot of tea and obsess about it from both our British cultures and our separate non-British cultures. And then we got on the tangent about true crime stuff, and we're like, oh my goodness, let's do this. And it was a joke about us driving the British countryside, solving murders in small towns, and we felt like we needed a name.
Yeah.
And that's how we became Matcha Masala. And then it was like, you want to do this?
Let's do it.
Let's do this.
Yeah, absolutely. And the goal is to work towards the road trip, right?
I want to do this. Yes.
So as long as everybody really likes this and tell all your friends, then maybe one day we can actually pull that out the back.
Yes. The savings account will get started. We'll put a tip jar and people can just start paying so that we can drive the British countryside again. Maybe we'll solve a murder in your town.
Exactly. That's it. We could be for hire. If you've got a murder that needs solving, then
we're both doing free entertainment. We might as well find a way to roll this into a job.
Exactly. That's right.
A proper gig. So yes. And this is episode 1. What we are going to be doing on this show is we can be kind of broad. We'll talk about a bunch of different topics under the sun. We're both a bit loquacious. We're chatty people, so we'll always have something to talk about. But because we both have this interest in true crime, and I guess kind of specifically more like murdery type things, we're gonna focus on trading off sharing a tale that we've discovered separately, researched, about a murder. Oops. So technical difficulties, everybody. I live in a place called Mérida in the Yucatan of Mexico, and we have rolling blackouts. And today, even though there hasn't been one in a week or so, they decided to hit me twice while we were trying to record. So apologies. I don't know where we left off.
We roll with it.
We're rolling with it. First episode, working out kinks. So I guess basically what our goal is with this show is to really just hang out and be best friends from different sides of the ocean and talk about murder as often as possible. We'll cover a bunch of different topics as well, but one of the things that we wanted to do was just I mean, I don't want to speak for you, but would you agree that like getting us an opportunity to pull us out of like the work we do with the mixed race identity stuff and just actually have a little bit of fun?
I think for both of us, this was such a great and timely opportunity to have something going on where we could step away from that work that we do, because obviously we're always going to be mixed. That is our life on the daily. There's no changing that. And not that we would want to change it, because that, you know, we all know that there are good sides and bad sides to that.
Sure.
And the work that we do can sometimes be super heavy, because a lot of it isn't just about our own experiences anyway. It's obviously, you know, with your show, you're talking to people at length and in depth about their personal experiences, which can sometimes be really like, you know, there are some harrowing stories out there and it gets heavy. And a lot of the stuff that I'm trying to do is provide discourse on different areas of, you know, of mixed race life and existence, and that definitely shines a light on some stuff which is difficult, and a lot of people then interact with us and ask us questions and look to us for support, which is a great part of doing this, and I do love that. And it is one of the reasons why I started this, is because I wanted to sort of find some support and common ground with other people like me. But that being said, it is nice to kind of switch that off every now and again and just exist as we are. So naturally, we're going to talk about being mixed because it is, you know, such a huge part of our lives. But being able to stray from that and talk about other things is really refreshing and just going to lift our spirits a bit. So
it's not lost on me that what is us taking a break on mixedness is to have a murder podcast, but you know, that's kind of the world now. Like, it seems, I swear my hair fell like completely flat while the AC was off. It's hot in the Yucatan. I think it's hilarious because it's also one of the things I've been reading articles about lately. It was like, why are women so relaxed about true crime and murder, which I think is a good topic for us to even consider.
Definitely.
And I have a theory.
Okay.
Let me run it by you.
Hit us with it.
Because we're women and femmes, and because life can be just generally dangerous, us existing and walking around outside, I believe that murder podcasts and true crime documentaries make us feel a sense of control over danger because we're witnessing danger that's separate from us.
Yeah.
And we can decide if we don't want to participate anymore or not.
Yeah.
And it's like a weird kind of like, again, I don't know why, but I just feel like there's a compulsion towards it.
Is there part of it, do you think, where it's like, is it useful information? Because we learn about these stories, what happened to people, and it's like a cautionary tale. Oh, okay. So, I mean, we all know walking through the dark parking lot, I used an American term, you know, and you've got your keys and all of that kind of thing. And we know there are risky behaviors we could engage in, which some people might say, well, you know, sure, she's asking for it. But is it actually useful to watch these programs and think, okay, well, this woman was just at the grocery store.
Existing. Yeah.
She was existing, going about her business, and this happened. So actually, we've learned things like kick the tail out before you get in the car and things like that, or like you'd somehow leave a trail of breadcrumbs to say where you are, or I don't know, maybe there are tips and tricks.
I agree. I think and it's probably not a smart thing for me to put on camera, but I think I have both learned how to murder and how not to be murdered in certain circumstances.
Hiding in plain sight.
I mean, there's definitely tips on just survival, because I mean, a lot of times it is just a person existing and something happens to them. Every now and then when it is a person that is kind of considered like to be in some kind of risky behavior or anything like that, what it really is, well, what is the circumstance that led them to that risky behavior? What man in their life sent them down that path?
Yeah, and let's be real. We could be engaging in the most risky behavior and doing whatever the hell we want to do. It still doesn't, it's not cause or asking to be murdered.
Right.
And it is some man, let's be real, who's doing the murdering. And so our person to look out for, are the men around us.
Yeah,
so
they're our natural predator.
It wasn't us engaging in risky behavior. It was them coming to get us. That's what's at fault,
And while I have specifically researched a person that I think is the perfect way to kick off our specific true crime podcast together, I have been watching a whole bunch of documentaries and things like that lately. And some of them, one in particular was one about the Ripper from the 70s in England.
The Yorkshire Ripper.
Yorkshire Ripper, yeah.
Yeah.
And I was amazed, not amazed like I can't believe that happened, but just amazed at like the constant repetitiveness of, well, these were prostitutes or these were women engaging in risky behavior. And until an innocent, in quotation fingers, 16-year-old got mixed up in it, then it was like, well, this is confusing because it was clearly these other, women that were asking for it. And in the end of the victims, most of them weren't, but they were in the reputation of it. And it just seems like, I mean, I think it is it could be cautionary. I think it is helpful because I definitely do things now that I kind of went down this path. And I think I started my interest in it. Well, I think I always was kind of interested. I always watched unsolved mysteries and things like that. But when the podcast version of it started popping up and the documentaries, I think it's been about 10 years or something.
Yeah.
For me. And there's things I do now when I go through a parking lot, American term, I text somebody and I say, hey, I'm walking through a large shopping center's parking lot. I'll text you when I get back to my car, and I'll say, like, there's one friend in particular who also shares the same interest in these shows. And I'd be like, I'm about to walk through a parking lot. I came through the north entrance or something like that. Like I was getting very specific in times of kind of high paranoia. I'm not always high paranoia, but there are times when
I feel like I go through times when I am more like that.
There's certain stories that hit you that seem so possible for your own life that you're just like, ooh, I need to pay attention to this. And
I really think that this idea though of it's prostitutes and so that kind of attitude that was had in that case, which has been in a lot of other cases as well, and there have been a few other serial murderers in the UK where there's a theme of that, but there is like a hierarchy of the victims obviously in these things, and if you're a sex worker then you're afforded less sympathy, and but the other aspect of that we know about is race is at play there, because it's only the same as when a child goes missing. If it's a beautiful blonde child, white child that goes missing, her picture is everywhere, it's all over the news, everybody must do everything they can to find this missing child. When your missing child is a child of color, specifically a black female child, there is less sympathy because we know about the adultification of black women, and that is always going to be at play, and that's really terrifying. And I guess for us, like that's got to come into it as well. There's a part of it that knows that you garner less sympathy with law enforcement and the public the further down this scale of things that you're on. So
and I think I usually tend towards those stories that affect Black and brown women, femmes, and girls mostly, because closer to home, what kind of things happened? Is it something that could happen to me, might have happened to me, or did I almost have that happen? But and I also wonder what kind of sympathy I would garner given my ambiguity, right? I physically present in a way that I either look like whatever race you think I am, or standing next to somebody, it might reveal more obviously what I am, or make me look even less like the thing I am if I stand next to them,
so true.
There are times, like I've described it in other shows and things, that like I can't fly back into my own country the United States with my blue passport and having been born there without being held up in customs and being grilled on whether or not I'm actually from that country. Was I naturalized or was I born there? Where were my parents from? No, where were my grandparents from? And so I go back into the States constantly fearful that they're not going to believe I'm an American citizen. And so now that I live in a country that is predominantly brown, I'm experiencing for the first time ever first-class American citizenship whilst in Mexico. And it's very confusing because I'm not used to feeling like this, and I'm not used to being granted so many obvious privileges. I don't think I don't experience privileges. I am a lighter skinned mixed person, but the way in which I am chosen a little bit.
These things are just so relative to the social expectation and cultural sort of norm of depending on where you are. And that's that the fact that it can be so changeable according to your location and proximity to other things just highlights how fucking ridiculous the whole thing is anyway, right? Like it's just mind-blowing because nutty. It doesn't mean anything. Like I got held in LAX for a number of hours in the airport because I flew into LA, and about 9 months before I flew into LA, I had been to Cuba and I had a Cuban stamp in my passport.
No.
And I had a foreign name and I looked like this, and they thought I was freaking Cuban. And so they held me, and I was 15, and I had gone on a group trip with a number of other people, and it was just me. I wasn't with my parents or anything. We had adults with us, but they were looking after all the other kids. So there was me in LAX trying to convince these American policemen or border patrol, whoever the hell they were, that I'm not Cuban.
Right.
And then they started speaking to me in Spanish, and I'm like, well, I speak Spanish, but I don't really want to let them know.
Yeah, don't reveal it. Like, honestly, if you're even remotely brown, don't reveal it. Yeah.
So I was like, but I'm there like trying to pretend like I don't understand what you're shouting at me in Spanish. I'm not ethnically or culturally Spanish at all, but I just happen to speak Spanish. And that was terrifying. And that was my first experience of the United States.
Like welcome. Welcome to the United States. I will say that I just went back to the States a couple weeks ago, and I didn't have a very good time. But the smoothest experience of me returning to the United States ever happened because I paid $100 for this thing called Global Entry, which exists in the United States and I think Canada, where you basically have been vetted by the government to prove that you are who you say you are. And therefore, I get to go into a different line when I pass through customs. And it's usually a shorter line because not as many people have paid that extra $100. And one, it sucks that I had to pay extra for it. But two, it was the best $100 I've ever spent related to my travel, because I came back in, and also I'm partnered with a person who's mixed Arab, and while light skinned, depending on your view, you may see him as Arabic or you'll see him as white. I see him as Arab when I see him, and depending on how long his hair is at the moment and how many curls are present, you know, either they're concerned about Muhammad or you know, he's Tristan, you know, like an Irish name Tristan. So it's always a concern, the two of us coming back together. But usually he passes through and I get held up, or when I travel alone, I get held up. And I think I told you about this experience with my British white cousin. And he goes through customs into America, no problem. And I got held up, and he was like, I don't understand. And I was like, that's because you're a white man and your skin color and your gender has a passport that the rest of us don't have, you know. And so that extra $100, if you're brown and ambiguous and you're American, highly recommend.
The tip.
Unfortunately, I highly recommend that tax on brownness. I wanted to start us off, if we're ready. Are we ready? I don't even know if we've covered our extra sections. The power went out. It threw me all the way off.
I think we're good. Yeah. I like the idea that we're going to be talking about murder, and each week we're not sharing these stories with each other in advance. So
no, we're going to surprise
my reaction is going to be genuine to whatever you're about to lay on me. And I'm excited about that fact. And although, you know, we're talking about these true crime documentaries, and some people might say we're a bit late to the party with true crime podcasts.
Sure.
Like it's been around for some time.
It's been around for a while. We're going to tell you about everybody you've heard about on somebody else's podcast.
Now we've decided to just rock up and be like, hey guys, we're going to talk about true crime. But I just wanted to sort of preface this a bit with the fact that I reckon we are going to come up with things that people haven't heard before, because we're doing a slightly different take, and we're going to switch out every week and tell each other stories. We've got the both sides of the ocean thing going for us. So that kind of helps. And I do like things which are a bit further in the past, like that's kind of where I'm going to nerd out a bit more. And so I'm hoping that I'm uncovering some things that aren't in the cultural zeitgeist too much at the moment, and so we're not oversaturating. We're going to be providing you with things that hopefully are a little bit different.
And this is one thing that another of the many things that you just throw on the pile that I enjoy about us as people who have learned to enjoy each other is that I do mostly search to the past. One, I think it's that extra level of removal that helps me process the dastardly thing that happened. But also
extra use of dastardly. Love it.
Thank you. But I also I think because I'm a person who has a defense mechanism of laughing through really awful things, I will come off as I will come off as less of a prick if someone so far back that people are like, okay, yeah, that was far enough away. To be fair,
we're doing that whole thing like too soon. Is it too soon?
Yeah, too
like
soon.
Victorian murder, too soon?
Too soon? I don't know. I do think that this is probably one of the more recent of any of my historical ones that I will do in future. But that was because I was looking for a very particular thing, and this was one I'd never heard of before too. So I'm also really glad to be kicking us off with something that was also a surprise to me, and I became massively obsessed with it in the last 3 or so weeks as I stumbled upon them. But I also think that like you said, we come from a different lens, so we'll approach things a little bit different. I have a tendency to seek out things that are connected to something I'm connected to, whether it's race or country, family, things or whatever. And this one, because we are both, one of our crossovers is that we are both of a British heritage. Well, we're actually both Welsh, except for you were born there. I just have the ethnicity in me. But I don't know that much about Wales or the Welsh side of my family, because my family owned the Englishness when they came to the US, one generation above me. And
whereas I like to use holding on to my Welshness to separate me from the Englishness.
Right? Yeah.
Because of all the atrocities, and the colonialism.
And I will say that this is one of the things why I'm leaning so hard into my newly discovered Welshness, which is why I do want to get out there soon so that I can really kind of feel it, is that, and we've both talked about this on our separate platforms before. As a mixed person, you tend to be sometimes the colonizer and the colonized, sometimes the, oppressor and the oppressed in your own families. And sometimes you see that shit happen in your own families. And me having a British grandmother who married a Black American man, I 100% have seen colonization happen inside my family, inside my household. And despite the fact that her mother was Welsh, her father was English, they lived in England. So naturally her identity will be more English a bit. Her mother died when she was quite young too. So there's that. But leading down to how I chose this person, I was kind of looking for something that was going to kind of hybrid over our Britishness and be tea related. It just because we're obsessed with tea doesn't we'll always talk about tea, but this one in particular is tea related.
Had to start with this. That's the only thing I knew in advance. I just need to tell everybody.
Tea related. I was like, I found the perfect one. I was so excited.
I'm ready. I'm into it. Let's go.
Yes, let's go. So I decided to go complete stupid British tourist style with my mug of choice today is my Keep Calm and Carry On Union Jack.
Calm and carry on even if the internet goes out.
You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Which we have definitely been, I don't know if I've been calm, but I've definitely been carrying on. So if we're ready, and I'm ready and you're ready, we're going to get into today's tale. It's tea related. It's British. So let's just kick this off with
Tea's ready.
Shall I be mother? So I'm going to play mother today, and I'm going to share the tale of the Teacup Poisoner. Dun, 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 dun. The Teacup Poisoner, and like I said, this is probably closer in history than I will normally go, but this took place in kind of the 60s and the 70s. The Teacup Poisoner, his name was Graham Frederick Young. He was born in 1947 in Neasden, Middlesex, and his life starts tragic. So in a lot of ways, some of the things that fascinates me about murderers or in particular serial murderers is the nature versus nurture aspect. Were they evil, or did circumstances kind of point them in that direction? And almost always when there's something related to their childhood, it's hard to tell if it's nature versus nurture, because they're already showing signs of things, but you don't know if it's because of other stuff. And so I am fascinated by this particular type of murder. So Graham Young was born in 1947. So the World War II is, Germany is the enemy of Britain. Mm-hmm. And yet this child decides to become completely obsessed with Nazis.
And like the British royal family just a couple of years before.
A little bit related. He is barely 7 when he starts telling people that Hitler was misunderstood. But his life does start out tragic. His mother, his biological mother, died 12 weeks after he was born of tuberculosis. She had something else happen that kind of triggered autoimmune, what we would say today is like an autoimmune deficiency of some sort. And so when the tuberculosis rolled around, that was it. She, the combination of her being pregnant or recently pregnant, and the autoimmune thing kicking in, she lost her life when he was only 12 weeks old. And so his father, being a machinist, and this is 1947, he's got an 8-year-old child and an infant all of a sudden, and no wife, and he doesn't know what to do. So he fosters his children out. The eldest daughter went to go live with his mom, and his son, brand new newborn, went to go live with his aunt Winnie. There's going to be a lot of same names in this story. His biological mother, depending on the report, she's either Bessie or Margaret or Molly or all three.
Okay, so Bessie and Margaret, they can all be,
because I thought Peg was most often a Margaret nickname, which never made sense to me, but that's very common in the United States.
Yeah.
So I wondered if Bessie and Margaret
comes from Elizabeth. Linked. So I don't know. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, but from what I understand, is her gravesite says Molly Young, which there's their last name. And then years later, he's going to marry another Molly. So we're going to have another Molly Young. Okay. So the father of Graham Young is Frederick, and his eldest daughter, 8 years old at the time that their mother died, was named Winifred after her aunt.
Winnie. Okay.
Winnie. But she's going to be, she's going to go by Win.
Okay.
And then the aunt is going to go by Winnie. But they're both Winifreds.
Okay.
So we got 2 Mollys in this story, and we got 2 Winifreds in this story.
There are more names in Britain.
There are more. And I'm surprised there's only about 3 to 4 Johns, but most of them aren't super important. So because I've got 11 billion Johns in the British side of my family. So I just assume like you have to have one every generation. But in this case, there are only a few Johns, but there's 2 Mollys and 2 Winnies. Okay. So 1947, when he was born, his mother dies when he's 12 weeks old. He gets shipped off to his aunt Winnie, and his sister gets shipped off to the grandmother. Yeah. And because that is the first parents that he essentially has, Aunt Winnie and Uncle Jack, he becomes quite attached to them. But
Jack is a diminutive of John. So
well, there you go.
Be the
so
John.
I'm sure we've got there's an extra John in there. And there's going to be a couple of Jacks too. Actually, now that I think about it, there's actually 2 Jacks too. But that's his first kind of parents. And so that's sort of who he gets attached to. And I forget exactly when, because, well, not that I forget. It's just literally from resource to resource, the age and the times change, and so it's hard to really nail it down. But I'm going to say that roughly in his toddler age area is when Frederick decides to get remarried, and he marries Molly number 2.
Okay.
Molly number 2, by all accounts, is a very nice woman, and it was her idea to reunite Frederick's family. So call back Wynne and Graham to the household so that they can be a family. The fact that Graham gets as old as he gets makes me feel like perhaps Molly too can't have had children, maybe, or they decided not to, or something like that, because in the early 50s, I mean, birth control was, like people are popping it out. I mean, my British grandmother is one of 6 or 7. My dad's brother, grandfather is one of 6 or 7. My grandma, like everybody's one of 6 or 7 in my family. So I was surprised that they only ended up with the 2 children throughout the whole tale. But Molly decides, let's reunite your family, and they pull Wynne and Graham back to the household. Okay. Now, this is one of the things that I would say would be like one of the tragedies of Graham's life, because while he may not have been aware of the loss of his mother, despite, maybe like, I don't know what the breastfeeding situation was or the early infant bonding period, but he's 3 months old when she passes. So, memory wise, I don't know how it may have affected him, but being pulled as a toddler from the household that you're comfortable in to essentially a stranger, because it's not like his dad was a very present thing during that time. He worked full time as a machinist. I imagine, a dad historically isn't the one that just, let me go visit my kids, kind of a thing. And so he was very attached to his Aunt Winnie, and it was really hard to adjust to life with Molly number 2, which they had to call mother. And I don't know if that was a point of problem for them. I imagine it would be harder for Wynne over Graham, because she was 8 when her mother died. But for whatever reason, they call her mother. She's their mother. And from a very early age, he is showing that he's uncomfortable around her. And everybody reports that she's a quite nice lady, but that they had an antagonistic relationship. So I can't tell if his not bonding with her is a trigger for that, or maybe she was not the kindest person in the world, or who knows, or maybe there's some resentment possibly for you not being my children, and yet I have to call you, my child or whatever. That all those things could be possible, or it could be something that I haven't even thought of. But I had to call a stepmom mother, and I fucking hated it. So I can understand that you would be kind of upset about it. So he ends up showing as a very early age a really interest and a drive and a weird knowledge of scientific things, chemistry in particular. He becomes really fascinated by things, and he's reading books about chemistry at a far advanced age, and yet he's struggling through all his learning. So they're really like working, like, come on, you got to do better and stuff like that. And I imagine, given the time period, there was probably a lot of punishment related to that. So more resentment gets born. And in that time, he also discovers the Nazis and occultism, and he decides to tell everybody.
Good combo.
It's a good combo. He decides to tell everybody he's a Wiccan. And decides to do little neighborhood animal sacrifices with some of the kids.
Why is it all the animals who have to suffer first?
It's one of the, like, I forget what it's called. I think it's called the McDonald Triangle, which is like the 3 tenets of, you might be a serial killer. And one of those tenets is cruelty to animals at a young age. And so he was always an awkward kid. Most people found him uncomfortable. He usually sat alone in school. So you got all this stuff building up. He's awkward. Later in life, people who did work with him or knew him would say that in today's terms, they would refer to him as autistic. But in those terms, who knows? They just thought he was weird. And he was treated as such, and he was bullied as such. But I don't know how. He was also weirdly charming in different areas, and so much so that he could convince a bunch of kids to go watch him harm a cat. And they would be like, Grandma's really weird. He did some shit with the cat. Or, people's animals would go missing and be like, maybe Graham got it, so he always had a reputation of being a bit weird. And then he started to make a Nazi symbol. I don't know, like, I hear that you're not really supposed to say the word on the YouTube, so the symbol that we're all familiar with, just in case you're not allowed to make it, he made his own armband. And he's going to school in this, and the teachers are like, I mean, again, he's born in 1947. So people in the 50s are really still sensitive about what happened. Many husbands and brothers and uncles and grandfathers were killed during the war. And regardless of whether or not you had any Jewish connection in that time, British people remember
society
being bombed and, things like that. They're not for Germany, with the exception of the British royal family. And so they were really sensitive about it, and they were telling him he needs to stop doing it, and they would take it away and he'd make a new one. He'd had Mein Kampf in his book reading when he was just really young. And again, he starts showing signs from 7 years old saying Hitler was a misunderstood man. And so people always were kind of at an arm's length with him. And he was struggling in school with the exception of his science stuff. And so by the time, and they don't do this test anymore from what I understand, but the 11s is a test that you would take when you were 11 years old. And in a completely shocking thing, this determined your path in life.
Yeah. I mean, they still basically have the same.
They have a version of it.
Yeah.
11 plus. Yeah. So he basically either would test into a schooling for secondary school that would allow him to go down a path of science, or one that would have him be a blue collar worker. And he barely passed by the skin of his teeth to be able to go into the school that would take him down the path towards chemistry. And as a gift, as a congratulations, his father, which I assume he regretted for the rest of his life, got him my first chemistry type of thing. And this is the 50s. So a chemistry kit in the 50s had some shit you should not have. It had some stuff in it that you shouldn't have. And he started doing experiments at home and things like that. And he started to become really fascinated. His heroes, in fact, were famous Victorian poisoners. He was fascinated by what poison would do to the body. So that is where the bulk of his animal cruelty was, let's see if this works. Let's see if this works. Oh my God. And at one point his dad was like, your shit is weird, and starts to tell him to stop doing it. But then Molly decides, in retaliation for something that he did, to bash up all his stuff. Yes. And so he started to build little shacks and he had little hiding places all throughout the neighborhood. There's like a forest nearby or something like that. And he started to hide his poisons at that point. But they always knew he was up there experimenting, and he would get in trouble from time to time because someone would get sick and they'd be like, you probably poisoned us by accident. And he would say, no, that wasn't me. Mother was making shampoos in the teacups. Maybe she didn't wash them very well. But what it actually was is he was practicing with such things as arsenic, antimony. I can't say the word. I should learn to say it. And then eventually thallium. And thallium, most of these are all metallic based poisons. Most of them have a really horrible effect on the body. And so he was experimenting with how much he can put into things and see what was happening. And he started by doing this, to the best of everybody's knowledge, with his schoolmate Christopher. They're probably about 12 or 13 at the time. And he starts doing switchies with them for sandwiches. They would start to swap sandwiches during lunches. And during one of the swapsies, he put a couple little dots of the into the sandwich, and little Christopher got real sick. Then he just started liking to see what would happen to Christopher, and every so often he'd get sick and go to the hospital, and then Graham would be really upset that he couldn't observe his friend. So he would call the house, and Christopher's family would be like, stop asking me all these questions. My kid is sick. Leave me alone. So Christopher ends up getting in and out of hospital for a while, and he would get better, and then Graham would have to start over again. He'd say things like, let's clear your lungs out. Let's go to the zoo and walk around. Here's some lemonade. And then he'd get sick again and be like, man, that lemonade, I just not that good anymore. So he would just keep doing this stuff. And he was so frustrated that Christopher would get better. And he's like, it's because I can't control what he intakes at all times. So I need a closer test group. And then he starts to poison his entire family.
Okay.
And this comes in a whole bunch of different ways. He is stealing the mother and the sister's makeup and doing experiments with them. He's got the antimony and things like that. He would go to the local pharmacy and say he was studying something, and they just thought he was a little prodigy. So they're like, yeah, sure, we'll give you a couple doses of these things. Or he'd be like, Mom wants me to make rat poison and stuff. And they're like, okay, here's some fucking arsenic. It was mad casual at the time.
Here you go.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
And he would sign the registry M.E. Evans, and that was how he would get away. Like, that was the name he used, because you had to sign a registry whenever you got poison from the pharmacy, which is completely bonkers to me. And he would just sign it, and they would give him arsenic, a little 12-year-old, 14-year-old kid, and he would then start poisoning his family. So he started first doing it in tea, and then he would do it like in sandwiches, and then he started to keep a diary. 3 grains of antimony, 3 grains of this, 5 of this. And over the course of time, the whole family was getting sick all the time. And people kept thinking it was a stomach bug or some weird thing that was going on in their family's house. So people would stop visiting because they were concerned about the health of that family. And they never really suspected Graham, because occasionally he would get sick too. They would always get mad at him and say, it's probably something that you did, thinking it was an accident. But then he would get sick too, and it would kind of make them forget that he was involved. But years later, he confesses, I never poisoned myself intentionally. It would be that a cup got mixed up, or someone else picked up what he already was like, when Molly.
Oh, okay. So he wasn't doing it to throw them off the scent.
No, he just was like careless because he was a child, essentially.
Yeah, sure. And poisoning is a man's game. Yeah.
Right. So Molly gets extremely sick, and then she starts to recover, and he's like, what the hell is happening? I'm giving her this very, very deadly poison. She should definitely not be getting better. So he kept upping the dosage, and she just still kind of wasn't doing well, but not doing as bad as she should have. So he decided to step things up, and he changed from, I think this is a change between arsenic and antimony. I can't say the word. I apologize. True crime podcast. I can't say the word. And he gave her a very lethal dose after one very frustrating night of her getting better. And she ends up keeling over in her backyard. She had just come from grocery shopping for Good Friday dinner she was about to cook. And she runs to the garden to, expel everything. And he is just standing at the window staring at her. Very creepy vibes for a 13-year-old, 14-year-old kid. And the dad comes rushing. He sees her struggling. He's like, hey, get help. And Graham is not moving at all. He registers this as, my creepy kid is in shock. He acknowledges that it was creepy, but he also thinks that Graham is in shock. And so he was just, he finally gets her to the hospital. She kind of does a little bit of a turnaround and says, I just want to get home and make my family dinner. But then within hours of her saying that, she ends up dying. She had lost her hair. She had wasted down to a nub of a person, and everybody was just horrified that she had it so rough, given that the rest of the family all suffered some things too.
Yeah.
Graham, being concerned, he understood a little bit of forensics at the time, not too much because he was a 13, 14-year-old kid, but he was concerned about it coming back to him. So he suggests to his dad, you've already lost one wife. You don't want to have to go through this again. Why don't you just cremate her? That way you don't have to worry about seeing her in the coffin. And the dad, being kind of weak and sad at the time, he really, really loved Molly too. He ends up agreeing, and they cremate her. So during the memorial service at the home, you go back to the home and you eat sandwiches and things like that. Random family members end up getting sick too when they got home. So they all got nervous that they were picking up the bug that the young family was getting. And so a lot of them were trying to get out of there hella early so that they didn't get sick. One of the people in particular that got sick was Uncle Jack. So people go back to their homes and they're just like, man, there is a sickness over this family, and we're not going to hang out over there anymore. And over the next couple of weeks after Molly's death, Frederick starts to get really sick, the dad. But the difference is, one of the doctors started noticing that his symptoms were very similar to what he understood arsenic poisoning being. Okay. And they do some tests. Finally. Yes. So now we're getting somewhere. Do some tests, and sure enough, arsenic poisoning. And Frederick yells, "Get that boy away from me," because he kept coming to the hospital asking the doctors all kinds of questions. And at first, the doctors were intrigued by this youth's knowledge. And then after a while, they'd be like, "We need to do our job. You need to stop asking us questions." And then when Frederick found out he had received arsenic poisoning, he was like, "Something's up with my creepy kid. Keep that kid away from me." Now, he would later say that he didn't necessarily think that Frederick or that Graham was actually poisoning him, but just that he was so irresponsible that he accidentally poisoned him and then therefore possibly accidentally killed Molly. But the thing is, Molly's death was not ruled a poisoning death. It was ruled a prolapsed vertebrae death because a year prior to that, or 4 months or 2 months, depending on the source, she was in a car accident. And her spine had some damage. And so they were thinking that this like protruding vertebrae situation was ultimately what killed her. So she was just marked as an unfortunate death, like maybe some sick symptoms. Maybe some of her sickness exacerbated the injury, and that's why she died. So he didn't necessarily think Graham was poisoning people on purpose, just maybe accidentally, and maybe that's why everybody got sick. And so he didn't want to be near the boy. He ends up recovering, and during that time, Graham's teacher, who has also thought he was creepy this whole time, was like hearing from, the small town type of mentality. People hear shit and stuff like that. And the teacher was like, "Why is he at the hospital asking questions about poison all the time? Let me look at his desk." And so the teacher goes and checks his desk. And in his desk, there's all these different powders that are marked poison in some way, shape, or form. Little creepy drawings of dead things and such. And so the teacher was like, "Something wrong with this boy." And he decides to he decides to do his own little sting operation. So rather than contact the police, what they did was set up a psychologist to come to school and pretend they were a guidance counselor for future schooling, and that they were doing an interview, which all the other kids were doing anyway, to figure out how to place him once he got into secondary school or further into secondary school. And the psychologist that was masquerading as a counselor was asking all kinds of questions related to Graham's chemistry knowledge and interest in poison and things like that, which affected Graham's ego bigly. And he decides to just start telling stuff. And he was like, "Oh, I know about this poison. I know about this poison. I know about this."
The ego will get them in the end.
That they have they don't want to be caught, but they need the world to know they did something, that no one else was as smart as they were in the game. And so he ends up kind of bragging about a few things, which led the psychologist to say, "Oh yeah, this boy is dangerous." And so they took that information to the police. The police decide it's an evidence enough to go ahead and question him. And in the times in which they were questioning him, a little vial of thallium fell out of his pocket. Now the question is, was that his carry around dose in case he got caught? That is one of the theories. Or was it just to have handy in case he was at a meal with somebody and wanted to drop them a couple little...
Fancy the poisoning.
Yeah. Both stories are the ones that people say is the thing. So I present them as both possibilities. So he ends up talking to the police, and he kind of ends up letting it spill that he killed his stepmother and that, yes, he was poisoning his family. And he says, "It was like having a drug addiction, except for I wasn't the one on drugs." And he just really liked the power that poison gave him. So he ends up getting tried for attempted murder of his father and his sister, not of his stepmom, because at that point she had been cremated and they couldn't prove it. But the story about Christopher started to connect too. So he gets hit for Christopher, Wynn, and his father. He gets tried in the Old Bailey, and they put him in Broadmoor, which I imagine you're going to hear about a lot on this show, because the way in which I end up being obsessed with someone who ended up doing time in Broadmoor is insane. It's, it's pretty famous. For those of you not out there that don't know, it's a pretty famous psychiatric, I want to say hospital in quotation fingers, but essentially a prison hospital for the criminally mentally insane.
And there were some really nefarious people in there, and some terribly questionable practices were done in there.
The
so
bill was there and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, it's crazy stuff.
Yeah.
So he gets there as the youngest person to ever get into Broadmoor since the Victorian era, like since the 1800s. And people are pretty fascinated by him because he was so young or whatever.
Yeah.
And at first he doesn't really do well. He creeps a lot of the inmates out and things like that. He doesn't have access to poison.
Tough crowd.
Yeah, big shocker. But over the course of time while he's there, the head psychologist becomes really interested in him and starts to think, I'm going to be able to cure this boy. And Graham figures out it takes him about 2 to 3 years to get that, like, if he plays the game, he could probably get out. He was sentenced to 15 years, which probably would have made him very institutionalized by that point. So he probably wouldn't have had a great life. So after 2 or 3 years in Broadmoor, and mind you, he's still a minor. He figures out how to game the doctor. And so he starts giving the doctor everything that the doctor needs to make him feel like he's getting cured. But every so often he would let it slip about how powerless he feels without his poison.
Yeah.
And then because the doctor liked him so much, he started getting privileges, jobs that he probably shouldn't have had access to and things like that. So he ends up getting boosted up to the library at one point, and he gets access to all these books. This is amazing. Broadmoor's library was filled with books on poisons, chemistry, murder, all kinds of stuff, and which he just absorbed.
What better place to really hone your craft?
Yes. And they, like, to think like this kid's a poisoner, maybe restrict poison books from him.
Yeah.
His school restricted poison books from him. He had to find little sideways ways to do it.
Yeah.
But the Broadmoor prison did not. So he was learning a lot during that time. He was wasting no time. Okay. But also during that time, he was learning how to game the doctor. He gets kitchen duty at some point, and then he gets to be able to serve the tea to the nursing staff. And at one point, the nursing staff goes to drink a cup of tea, and they're like, wait, this smells like toilet boy cleaner. And so while they couldn't prove it was him, they were pretty sure it was him. So anytime an inmate got out of hand, nurses would say, be careful or we'll have Graham serve you a cup of tea.
Oh.
He ends up
so on brand. I love it.
I know, right? It's like it's just stacking. He ends up getting a roommate that had come back from the war with some post-traumatic stress disorder and had come home and killed his parents, shotgun to the head type of situation. So they put him in Broadmoor, and he ends up being Graham's roommate. But he snored and he had night terrors, and he drove Graham crazy. So as soon as Graham kind of figured some shit out, he found a way to shuffle roommate of his mortal coil by finding laurel plants around the grounds, for which you can extract and the oils and turn into a form of arsenic. Because they couldn't figure out, why did this guy die of arsenic? There's no arsenic in there. We can't do rats with it. And yet
they should have read their own books.
Yes. And here Graham was talking, it's like, oh, you know, you can get arsenic from laurel plants, and they're all over the grounds. And they're just like, Graham. And they legit don't go any further with it. They just brush it off like it ain't no thing until like a couple years later, where someone was like, you know what? We should probably get rid of those plants. And they finally get rid of those plants. But by that point, the two main doctors are really obsessed with Graham, and they think they've been able to solve this kid. He gets 8 years into his 15-year sentence, and they say he's in danger of being institutionalized if he crosses over the 10-year mark. He's done really, really well. And even though there's legitimate problems across, like, nursing staff knows some things. Orderlies know some things. Inmates know some things. Inmates won't snitch, but they'll beat the shit out of him every time they think he's done something to them. Nursing staff will talk shit, but won't report shit. And so the psychologists they just think he's doing well. And they write to the home office and say, please release this child. He's come so far. We don't want him to institutionalize. He will make a good member of society. He's kept up with his chemistry work, so we think he'll be a scientist. And they let him go. They let him go. And he was 14 when he went in. He did 8 years. So he's in his early 20s, and he goes, and his sister Wynn by that point has forgiven him enough to be like, you misguided kid, you had it rough. Come and stay with me, my husband, and my young baby. No. And we'll see how it goes. So he gets released on a Christmas release, and he goes to their house. For some reason, he manages not to poison his family, despite really, really wanting to.
Okay.
But the brother-in-law is uncomfortable and things like that. And ultimately he decides it's not working out. So I need to go stay somewhere else. So he finds a roomlet to stay in with a Pakistani family. This is one thing where racism will actually be a reason why he doesn't get caught again, because he's staying in a house with Pakistani people.
Okay.
He ends up in this sort of hostile type situation. Like there's other former, I would say, people struggling, whether it was they did some time in a mental institution or they did time in the military and they weren't quite right or something like that. This family let out a bunch of these rooms, and those were the type of people that would end up with them because, again, racism. So, if it's not going to be easy for you to enter society, you would end up in this household. Okay. He ends up getting in a training program to help him become a store manager at a photography type of manufacturing.
Ooh, nice. Access to chemicals.
And him and one of the other fellow guys that are doing this, they end up both hanging out and becoming drinking buddies. And guess what happens? The boy starts getting sick inexplicably. But he always notices he gets sick after drinking beer. And he was an athlete and all kinds of stuff. And he's trying to play football one day, and then his legs stop working. And he's like, this is weird. I'm really sick. Goes to the doctor, and Graham no longer has access to him. And so he recovers and he gets placed somewhere else, but he never gets to play his sports again. He never gets to run. He was an avid runner. And he's just a lucky guy because he survived. He had lifetime problems as related to it. But because he got moved, Graham, he was on the list. He was going to be, Graham wanted to see how thallium, he started to get really into thallium. And so he was, destroying. Thallium is colorless, odorless, tasteless. It's a metallic poison, and it causes dramatic alopecia, weight loss, all kinds of things, stomach issues, vomiting, etc. But it always is masked in whatever someone thinks is happening to you.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Food poisoning, you got something else or whatever. And so he's able to get away with stuff like this for a long time. He ends up getting placed at a photography manufacturing plant, and guess what his job is? It's giving tea to all of the employees. And so over the time, he's being trained by someone who's planning on leaving because they're going to go get their PhD or something like that. And so that guy's going to stick around for 2 months and train Graham on the job. Meanwhile, his duties are like light office cleaning, helping people deliver mail, offer the twice daily cup of tea. And people randomly just start getting sick, wouldn't you know it? His boss starts getting drastically sick and would go away for 3 or 4 days, recover, and come back. He'd start to feel better. He'd come back, and then he'd start to get sick again. One of the guys that was like a mentor to him that really, really took to him, they're like, I understand you being an awkward guy. Here's some money. Why don't you get established and stuff like that? You can pay me back eventually. And he starts getting sick. The guy who's training him, who's going to be leaving in 2 months anyway, he starts getting sick. And then anybody that just randomly thought he was a little bit creepy, they started getting sick too. And people are getting really nervous. Why is everybody in this place getting sick? And they end up doing all kinds of tests. They bring in these outside sources to try to check and see if it's the chemicals that is doing stuff or whatever. They basically say it's not the chemicals. They clear that, but then in a group meeting, everything like that, we're still trying to figure out, but there's also a bug happening simultaneously at the elementary schools, the primary schools. And so they're like, oh, this is just a bug. It's just a bug of the area. But they're like, no, because they're getting alopecia and stuff like that. And then 2 people die within 2 or 3 weeks of each other. The boss and the mentor. They took, they spent a lot of time with Graham, and so they both got it really hard. They took time off. One of them even went on a holiday and got completely better, and then got a lethal dose when he got back. And so that's why he died. And all of them suffered extreme weight loss, stomach problems, hair loss, and all kinds of stuff. So they had another employee meeting where they're just like, we're sorry for all this tragedy, but we've cleared the building. We don't know it's not the chemicals. And then guess who raises their hand to ask for some suggestions? Graham, in all his egotistical glory, decides to say, isn't it interesting that both the people who died suffered alopecia, and that some of the people that are sick are starting to show signs of alopecia. Might they all be subject to thallium poisoning, which thallium was present in the manufacturing plant because it was one of the chemicals that they used to do photography lenses with. And so the doctor was like, the way he asked that question with all this context and information about thallium is really creepy. Let's maybe talk to the police about that. And so they tell the police they suspect this person of possibly they couldn't figure it out. They didn't know what would make sense, but they're like, he knows way too much about thallium in a way that's different than a person who uses it for their work. So we're a little bit concerned about that. And he ends up going away, despite the fact that his dad had barely spoken to him after the whole "you killed your stepmother and put me in the hospital" thing. He ends up allowing him to come for a visit, and he goes to his dad's house overnight. His Aunt Winnie is there, and he's hanging out with the family. And while that is happening, the police go to his house. And oh wait, nope, this was a mistake. I have to go back. This is where racism also gets in the way of him being caught. At one point, one of the coworkers thinks it's Graham, but not like he poisoned us. But Graham lives in a house of Pakistanis. And this is a paraphrase quote that basically said, and we all know that Pakistani people carry germs that British people don't carry. So obviously he's bringing those germs into the thing. She writes a very detailed letter about this, submits it to the head of office of the manufacturing plant, and they're like, all right. They hand it over to the cops. The cops go, that's weird, this is racist, and they dismiss it.
Oh, good. Well,
but this is like between one of the deaths and the other death, like they just kind of like but like kudos to the cops for being like, this is racist nonsense, and just so like wokeness was present randomly, but at the same time, this was one time where it should have they should have looked into it anyway. But it sucks. It also sucks. So okay, fast forward, 2 people are now dead, 1 person's on his way. He's on the verge. A number of people are sick and in the hospital. Some people are just at home. At the grand total, at some point there was like 70 people that had been randomly sick and or severely sick at some point. And so that's when he goes away for the weekend to be with his dad. And the doctor's like, that thallium thing was really weird. And so they get the cops. So the cops go and search his house. Now he wasn't home, but because the Pakistani people own the home, they were like, yeah, you can go into the room. And they unlock the door. They cooperate with the police. Also because they were foreigners, they were concerned about police showing up at their place. So they were like, anything you need, cooperation, here's the key. Boom, boom, boom. In their room, in Graham's room, they discover Nazi paraphernalia all around his walls. They also find what he entitles Young, because his last name is Young, Poisoner's Handbook of Studies and Practices, or some shit like that. That's named differently in a bunch of different places. But essentially, it's now known as the Young Poisoner's Handbook. And he wrote a chart out of daily doses, and he also used the initials of his coworkers rather than their names. And he would say like, F is really responding to the thallium today, or something like that. And he had his graph chart of the deterioration of his coworkers and stuff like that. He would write notes about frustrations of when they started getting better and when they weren't. And basically, the smoking gun is right here. Everything aligns with every initial aligns when someone got sick, when someone was killed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So they go to his dad's house and arrest him. His dad immediately was like, fuck this kid. And he the cops have barely pulled Graham out of the house yet, and dad is ripping up baby pictures. He's tearing up birth certificates. He is going to destroy every marker that Graham was his child and in his house. And he was like, I'm done with you forever. Don't ever come to me for anything. Don't talk to me. I'm done with you. And he basically destroys every record of Graham existing in their family and in their households. But while the cops are pulling him away, again, egotistical, possibly autistic serial killer here goes, which one you doing me for?
Oh,
yeah. Like, he's also gonna at some point deny that he did it, but why would you ask that question? you know.
I just really need to know for the record.
Just for the record, they take him in, and I love that it's which one are you doing me for, and not like, I mean, you just basically told me it's more than one person.
Yeah.
But like, which one could it be? When they go and check his thing, he has enough poisons, and this is when he was a child, they found something where he had enough poisons that could have killed like 300 people. In his adult apartment, he had enough things to kill like 70 or 80 people. Basically, everybody he was already poisoning. There was going to be a problem in Slough, which is where he was at the time. So they take him in for questioning, and he just can't help himself. He's so proud of himself. It was so important for him to discover the perfect poison for the perfect murder. And with thallium, he found it. And honestly, the reason why he even gets to thallium is because he read A Pale Horse from Agatha Christie when he was young, and it always kind of sat in his head. And then he also found out that I think Belgians poisoned some Nazis, their water supply at some point. They also used thallium. He'd read about that. So he had thallium. He was like, I figured it out, y'all. And so he was like, he wanted to be called the world's poisoner. That's what he wanted to be called. But they started calling him the Teacup Poisoner. He's like, I don't like it though. He's like, he liked the notoriety, but he was like, but I'm like the poisoner.
I need a better nickname.
And they're like, you're in Slough, boy. Like, calm down. So he ends up telling them everything. Basically, he just goes off on a tangent, like, this is how I saw this, I observed that, blah 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 blah. And so when it came time for him to sign the confession, he goes, oh no, I'm not gonna do that. He's like, good luck getting me. You don't understand. You know, he get real fixated on, you don't have a motive, and I haven't provided you for one, so there's no way you can convict me. So I'm not going to sign it. So they take him back to the Old Bailey, and he thinks he is just going to get all this notoriety, and then he's going to be released because they can't prove his motive. But
you kept fastidious records.
Yeah, like it's schoolboy error. He tries to tell a psychologist, "Oh no, that's just a coincidence. I'm writing crime novel, and this is just kind of notes. And yeah, sometimes it's inspired by the things I saw was happening, but it has nothing to do with anything that I was doing." And then literally, like, thallium is in his pockets, like it's in his house, it's all over the place, right?
Oh, what, this thallium? No, that's not mine.
This one. And people were like, where did you get this poison from? And he was like, I just go to London and I tell them I'm a chemistry student and I'm working on a thing, and they hand it over and he signs M.E. Evans, and he's good to go. So they had enough people, they had witnesses and all kinds of stuff. It is technically mostly circumstantial, but he thought he wasn't going to get done on the murders because in the case of one of them, they had been cremated, and he thought he wasn't keeping up on that kind of forensics. So he was like, that, no one could prove I did that. The other one, they caught it in the hospital. They knew he was poisoned. One guy killed himself. I forgot about this guy. I went a little bit off notes. One guy killed himself because he was in so much pain. He couldn't deal with it. So he killed himself. Another guy was about to kill himself. He begged his wife, please bring me the gun, anything to release me from this. And she was just like, nah, let's go to the hospital. And he basically he was on his way out. He has lost his hair. He was in so much pain. He luckily recovered enough over time, and he lived but he was always affected. He always had health problems and stuff like that. But so people were dying, people were sick, but they ended up testing they ended up getting the ashes of one of his bosses, and they tested it, and by that point they knew how to find certain poisons, and so they got him for murder, proper murder. He again still going into the courtroom every day just being like, you can't prove it. And then one day he kind of starts to figure out that they might actually nail him, and so he starts to try to go an insanity plea way with his lawyer, and his lawyer was like, well, we'll see what we could do. And ultimately he gets convicted, which he was flabbergasted that it happened. And then by that point he was really irritated that they were calling him the Teacup Poisoner and not the world's poisoner. And so he says at that point, all right, fine, I did the shit, don't put me back in Broadmoor. I never want to go back to Broadmoor. We're in. Put me in proper prison. And so they're like, fine. And so they stick him on the Isle of Wight. A couple of random people did seem to die of poison while he was in prison too. You know, sometimes he'd get the shit completely kicked out of him by other inmates. And yet again, no reports. So you can't really necessarily say. All told, there's an estimation of him at least poisoning somewhere in the neighborhood of possibly 200 and so people. In terms of his death toll, they technically don't count Molly, although he counts Molly. And then the Behringer, the guy in Broadmoor, and then his two bosses and one other guy, Barrage is the guy from Broadmoor. He's a John. That's one of my Johns. The I would say 4 or 5 people, because some people killed themselves, which I think he's culpable in. And then it's just the fact that well over 70 people at his place of business had gotten poisoned at some point and experienced some sickness. He ends up, you know, kind of living his life in prison or whatever. He never really regrets it. He regrets the branding, but not the action. He really liked finding in prison. What he really enjoyed is that he could find fellow Nazi sympathizers that understood that Hitler was misunderstood. But then in 1990, he dies mysteriously at 42, I think. What they say was a heart attack. But there's also a belief that he was possibly like shredding, you know, like scraping a metal desk or something like that. And just collecting it. There's belief that he killed himself. There's belief that inmates killed him because he tried to poison the inmates as well. And guess what he tried to poison them with? Or in a teacup.
He's not doing. He's not doing
himself favors. He's literally like the big carafe that they use for like a workplace. That's where he's putting poison and shit like that. Like it's going in people's tea. What else are they gonna do? Sometimes it was sandwiches, but it was mostly tea because that was the easy thing to do. And so he ends up dying either by a heart attack or by poison or by an inmate. But this was in 1990 and he was 40 years old. So he's from my lifetime. You know, I was born in the 70s and I was a teenager, a preteen by the time he was dying. Actually, at the time he died, I was the age he started that we know of poisoning people.
Right. And how interested were you in poisoning at that age?
I mean, I have one reason I'm semi-interested in poison, which has to do with a family tale that I'll tell you offline, but I won't tell online because I still have people alive in my family. But other than that, I was really fascinated by just the fact that he gained this curiosity at such a young age, like under 7. How did you understand?
Where was the spark for that, though?
That's what's not clear. Like, there's not enough about him in his early life to really nail it down. But basically, the stories you hear is at every phase of life, including toddler times, he was an awkward kid. He was uncomfortable to be around. He could talk better to adults than children, so he didn't really. He was like, fuck them kids from early on, and literally tried to poison some of his classmates. He would creep people out by talking really deeply and openly and detailed about either sicknesses or murder or poison or whatever. His hero, one of his heroes was Dr. Crippen, which is an infamous poisoner.
Wow.
You know, like, So I love that I said that name and you're like, oh, wow.
Oh my God.
Stay tuned, audience, because we'll probably get into him at some point. And he just was like, it was so weird that you guys don't understand how misunderstood Hitler is and how dope Dr. Crippen is. You know, like he just had these. He also, some of his heroes were like Nazi experimental scientists and stuff like that. So
so maybe that was the crossover for him. You know, the science.
Yeah, so he did so poorly in all other subjects, but he did really well in chemistry.
But then he wasn't targeting like minorities or ethnic people with, so it wasn't like a Nazi aim.
No, he had he adopted the presidential version of having affairs. Secretaries, people that are close to you, like interns. The way the U.S. presidents are known to have their affairs, that is how
I did not have poison relations with that woman.
Yeah, I did not have poison relations with that woman. He just needed people he can observe long term. He was immensely frustrated by people having homes to go to. Like
wow,
I need access to you. Yeah, like how dare you? He just needed actions, and sometimes it was literally because somebody annoyed him that they became a target, and sometimes he did regret certain things. Like when he killed his boss, he was like, it's unfortunate that he's one of the ones that's got to go. He just has to go. But he's quite a nice gentleman, and he's like literally writing this in, like he's not lamenting that he's murdering people. But he is kind of being like, of all the people that I had to murder, that guy, he was a nice guy. Okay. It was so weird. So he would understand empathy in random ways, which is I think how he managed to convince the doctor he was cured. But for the most part, he was just kind of confused why people cared about certain things. He was like, don't you understand how brilliant a thing I'm doing? You're focused on the weird thing, the humanity of it. I'm talking about this amazing thing I'm developing. And so it reminded me a lot of the Unabomber also from the United States. He was so confused why people cared after a person had died. He was like, but they're dead. Move on with your life. He didn't understand that people had something to mourn. And I think Graham was similar to that, and he just didn't
sort of
understand.
Detachment from humanity.
Yeah, he was just like, this is amazing stuff I'm doing. I'm doing real science here out of my rented flat. Like you should be impressed with me. That's kind of how he did. So I had never heard about him before I started to look into this. And it's crazy because it's like, again, it wasn't that far into history, but it had all great elements. Tea, poison, British.
It's got a little bit of everything.
A little bit of everything, and like, what's a murder tale without some Nazi sprinkled in there too? So,
just for good measure. Nice.
Yeah, just a little bit.
I loved it. That was amazing.
I hope I didn't go on too much, but
no, it was good. I was there. I was like, and then,
I was just really fascinated by it. And a lot of my fascination has to do with like, what's the difference in that person's mind to mine? Like every other human on the planet, someone has pissed me off or hurt me or harmed me in some way that I'm like, I'll kill that person. But like, that's not a real thing. I know that for me, just getting the words out sometimes is the healing thing. Even maybe dreaming or fantasizing about someone that you don't like very much dying. Sometimes that can be kind of cathartic in itself. But what is the thing that makes Graham Young go to, I'm going to actually just kill people I live with,
Then
I'm
also interested because I think for me, I'm sort of like, okay, but I know you were taking notes, but what was your goal? Were you trying to see how much you could give someone before they would die, or how frequently you could dose them? Or I need to understand the methodology.
I think the method was like, depending on different makes and models of folks, possibly, what would he have to do? Because ultimately what his grand design was, while it wasn't really written out, is he wanted to be able to poison people all over the world where nobody could guess the source.
And then he might have become the world's poisoner.
Then he might have become the world's
poisoner. But you got to take that shit global.
Yeah, you got to leave Slough, bro. Like, what the hell? I had to go full American on that statement.
Nice.
But yeah, like it just seems so odd that the audacity to believe that you warranted, and again, heavy losses. Like I feel, obviously like real people lost their lives, and a lot of them did. But to think that the audacity that like your little small town British town murders were somehow going to turn you into this global villain. What's that disconnect too? Like there's so many things about like what's up with your brain versus mine. And I don't know why I put it in that term, but I've gone 45 years and I haven't managed to become a serial killer. So obviously I have something in check. what do you not have in check? You know what I'm saying? Like, why?
And I wasn't always so convinced of my own mental stability. But
I don't know.
Having not murdered anyone, I was
depression,
doing okay.
Anxiety, definitely some abuse in my childhood. Like some people could get it. But why don't I? Like, why is it not a thing
what's
for
the difference?
Me?
Yeah.
And I've said that to people before, and they're like, that's a weird that's a weird part to be fascinated by. And I'm like, but it's your brain. Your brain is so strange. Yeah. Why does my brain be
not
like,
do that thing.
Just fantasize about them dying? Don't do anything about it. But Graham is like, let's see how many
need to see that go.
How many licks does it take to get to the center of this Tootsie Pop? Basically, like how many little grains of poison can I drop into your thing before you die? Yeah. And sometimes he wanted people to die fast, and sometimes he wanted them to die slow.
And interestingly, poison is usually referred to as a woman's weapon,
woman's
right?
poison, right? Which again was another reason why I wanted to use it, as our first topic. It's like he's shirking some of the things you anticipate.
Yes,
about
absolutely.
Poisoners.
Yes, subverting all expectation.
Yeah,
he's not Catherine de Medici with his little poison ring, passing over.
Man, I wanted one of those rings when I was a kid, but I wanted it to have pixie candy dust in it, so I could just be like that. See, this is what I'm saying. There's signs from early on that I was going to be interested in this as a subject. But the way it would have played out is like candy. I want candy in my ring. Or in like a little necklace. I could just be like, nice. Whatever. So yeah, that's the story of Graham Young, the compulsive teacup poisoner.
And here ends our first foray into murder.
That's exciting. I'm also like really glad you hadn't heard of the person too, because I was like, you're gonna go, oh, I know about this, and then it's just like, okay, well, I'll tell you the story anyway. And I'm sure that's gonna happen at some point. But
but that's okay. Not everyone's gonna know.
But yeah.
Oh, so good.
So episode 1 is in the can. We will be back next week with your first tale.
Indeed.
And I can't wait to hear you. Like, part of me is just like chomping at the bit, wanting to know the story, but also part of me is just like, just live in the moment and try to
Yeah. I know.
But we're like not scheduled for another week, so I gotta wait a week to be.
we got to spread this out. We can't lay it all on too quickly.
Right. All right, for everybody out there, this is a new show, so we need you to spread us around and let other people know that we exist. You can follow us on Instagram, TikTok, and our YouTube channel, not to mention all of the various podcatchers. But if you don't mind, try to subscribe to us on Spotify, because this is where it's hosted from, and we get benefits if we get more than 1,000 people following us on Spotify.
So tell a lot of your friends.
Yeah, tell a lot of your friends. But you can find us
at Matcha, Masala, Murder
on all of the social media platforms. And I am one of your co-hosts, Sharmane Fury.
And I'm your other co-host, Rhia Kaur. Well, thank you. That story was truly steeped in intrigue. And we have well and truly spilt the tea. We're going to go mop up until next week.
Bye, everybody. Keep calm and carry on. Don't die.
Matcha and Masala is produced and hosted by Sharmane Fury and Rhia Kaur.
This is a Main Hustle Media production in association with Virtual Reality Studios. All stories are researched to the best of our ability, with information freely available to the public.
This podcast is intended for entertainment purposes, and due to the nature of true life crimes, some information remains inaccessible and new information can come to light after recording.